good morning. Thank you.
And just one technical check, Brian, am I able to advance the slides now?
I will advance them on your request.
On my queue, got it.
Your queue is better than request, yes, on your queue.
Okay, that's much easier than, I'd probably knock my coffee over while I reached for my mouse, and that would be a meeting stopper. Okay, I understand we have Paul Narcy on the line, and we're 7:30 on the nose. So with that, I would like to welcome everybody on the video line to the GVHA 17th Annual General Meeting. And today, obviously, we're meeting virtually, so I will be going through some specific instructions for member agency representatives and for those in the gallery. We have had some legal advice from Catherine on how to amend our operating rules for today, but we'll get into those in detail. Next slide, Brian. To begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting virtually on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen peoples. These are the traditional territories that we operate on, and we acknowledge the Songhees Nation and the Esquimalt Nation, whose historical relationships to the land continue until this day. Both nations form a very important part of our 8-member agency family. And of course, today being September 30th is Orange Shirt Day. And in honor of the Indigenous children that were sent away to residential schools, at GVHA, we are committed to reconciliation and advancing respect and mutual understanding with all Indigenous peoples and communities. And I would like to strongly underline the economic development commitment of the Harbour Authority to Esquimalt and Songhees. Next slide. We will officially call our meeting to order. Now, in order to do this, I have to call for somebody to move, second, and then individually approve. So because we're on video, I need each director to call out their approval. So if I could ask member agency representative to move our call to order, please call out your name.
So move, Kevin Murdoch.
Thank you, Kevin. And a second?
Second, Chief Sam here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Sam. And if we could just go through the roll, call out your name if you're in agreement.
Yeah, agreed.
So John, you agree?
Agreed, John Wilson.
Yeah, agreed.
And Lyle?
Agreed, Kevin Murdoch.
Agreed, Jacob Hellowell.
Agreed, Katie Hooper.
This is our first test. Is anybody?
Ben Isett, agreed.
Thank you, Ben. Good morning.
Morning.
And any other member representative who has not signaled their approval to call the meeting to order, please speak now. Okay, Carolyn, I think we're good.
Yeah.
And Catherine, you're okay if we start?
Yes.
Okay, well, I would like to officially welcome our voting member representatives and our life members that are in attendance. And I see Bill and I see Paul. My screen is limited, so apologies if there is anybody else in the background. We do have staff on the line. Of course, we have Ian Robertson, our Chief Executive Officer, Judith Ethier, our Chief Administrative Officer, Carolyn Laviolette, our Board Administrator, and Brian Kant, the man behind the screen, our Manager of Communications. So welcome to everybody, and thank you for joining us virtually and for working with our procedures this morning. So Brian, next slide. I would like to talk about our virtual AGM just for a moment. You've passed the first test because every time we approve something, we'll be calling on you individually for all of the votes to ensure that we have accurate representations for all motions. So as you just did, call out your name and I approve, just clearly signal that you approve. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them verbally. There is also a Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen that works really well. Brian is monitoring that, and he'll get back to you lickety-split and help you through any technical challenges. There is also a chat function. You can post among those online if you'd like to put a question out that way as well. If there are members of the public in our virtual gallery, questions are going to be answered during the community information session that immediately follows the AGM. And this AGM is a meeting between the Board of Directors and the 8 member agency representatives who are on the video screen today. Again, for those technical issues, please use the chat. So next slide, Brian. Today, if we can move one more, we have our 8 member agencies represented. Katie Hooper from the Esquimalt Nation, Chief Ron Sam from Songhees Nation, Mayor Kevin Murdoch from the Capital Regional District, Councillor Ben Isaac from the City of Victoria, Councillor Jacob Halliwell, Township of Esquimalt, Paul Nursey from Destination Greater Victoria, John Wilson from the Chamber, and Lyle Sotart from the Victoria Esquimalt Harbour Society. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us this early. Now, we also have Catherine Stewart. Catherine is very experienced in helping us run our AGM. She's our parliamentarian and voting secretary. So if we get into a bind with Robert's rules or our any of the other operating rules that we're going to be using today, she'll make sure that our business is duly concluded. So just know that we have that resource on the line. Thank you for joining us, Catherine. Next slide. Okay, in terms of notice of meeting and confirmation of quorum, I will call everybody's attention to the package, that AGM package that was sent out that lists our business for today. So all GVHA members, voting and non-voting, received a notice of the annual general meeting in accordance with the Societies Act and GVHA bylaws. So we're duly called to order today. I would also like to confirm with our parliamentarian that we have a quorum of voting member representatives. We have a minimum of 3 required per GVHA bylaws. So Catherine, could you please confirm for the record that we have quorum?
Yes, I confirm for the record that the meeting has quorum.
Thank you. Next slide, Brian, please. We're going to move on to approval of the agenda. And just like we called the meeting to order, if I could ask somebody to please call out their name and move approval of the agenda.
Kevin Murdoch, so moved.
Thank you, Kevin. And a second?
John Wilson, second.
Thank you, John. And could I have the remaining member agency reps signal their approval by calling out their name?
Katie Hooper.
Ben Isaac.
Paul Nursey.
Hello.
Okay. Anybody missing?
Yeah.
Lyle Sotart approved.
Yeah, Chief Sam here, approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul, are you on the line? Did I miss you?
I signaled my approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just for the, Lyle had a suggestion on chat that we just do this in the order of the voting member representation in the agenda handbook. That probably makes sense if we just do it top to bottom, that we can get
That
through it a
would be
bit quicker.
perfect. So I'm going to leave that to the member reps to just follow that order. Thank you for that, Kevin. I think that was Kevin.
It was.
Okay, approval of our standing rules. So those were included in the meeting package. If I could ask somebody to move.
So moved, Kevin here.
And second,
Seconded,
Condemned Lyle Sotart.
So approved,
Okay.
Kevin Murdoch approval. Agreed.
thank you. And then down the ranks in agreement.
Ben Iset in favor.
Paul Nursey.
John
Support.
Wilson.
Yeah.
Katie Hooper,
Jacob Hellawell.
Yeah, and Chief Sam here. It's good.
Lyle Sotart approved.
Okay. Hopefully everybody is clear on our standing rules just before we go to the minutes. Obviously, only voting member representatives may vote. And as we've been doing, we're taking separate verbal votes for each motion. Are there any questions before I dive in? I'll just pause for a moment. Everybody seems to be operating just fine in this environment. Catherine, would you like me to highlight anything from the standing rules beyond what we've already adopted?
no, I don't think that's necessary. They're there, everyone can see them, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
On to the minutes from last AGM. If I could ask somebody to please move approval.
Move approval.
Second.
Kevin.
Thank you. And a second?
Yeah, Chief Sam here. I'll second.
Okay, and is there any discussion? It was quite interesting to read a snapshot of 365 days ago to see where the Harbour Authority's momentum was at. Any questions? No discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, just through the ranks?
Kevin Murdoch agree.
Ben Iset in favor.
Paul Nursey, support.
Katie Hooper in favor.
John Wilson in favor.
Okay, I think we're at the end of the roll.
Yeah,
No,
Jacob Hellawell in favor.
Lyle Sotart in favor.
There we go. Okay,
I think we were missing Chief Sam. I didn't hear his approval on that one.
okay, thank you, Catherine.
It's Ron here. Approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everybody's understanding. It's a little hard to hear sometimes as we go through. Okay, for the next couple of minutes, I would like to report on behalf of the Board of Directors on the last fiscal year. Ian will follow with his CEO report. And if we could move on to the next slide, please. 4 core areas that I'll cover today that are very, very important to the board. Our member agency engagement, the Ogden Point Master Plan, our recent emissions inventory for crews, and how the Harbour Authority operates with respect to governance and accountability. We can move to the next slide. So over the past year, our directors have spent considerable time on how we as a board can improve our engagement with each of our member agencies. Many of you know that Ian and I have spent a lot of time over the past years meeting with each of you and reporting out to your respective councils and boards. And also communicating with other organizations and community groups throughout Greater Victoria. So during this time, we've worked to ensure that various concerns were being addressed and that the good work being done by the Greater Victoria Harbour Authority was communicated to our key partners. So we've done that in person. We've also done that through newsletters and direct report outs after each board meeting to the member agencies. And personally, I'm very proud of the process that our board has developed for engaging with each of these organizations. And it's really allowed for constructive dialogue to take place. I think the Harbour Authority has been very accountable and transparent in the preceding year with respect to its plans, its challenges, and its hopes and dreams for the future. We also continued our annual reporting to each of these agencies in a format that that really work best for each organization. So we have tailored how we communicate. That's not to say that Harbour Authority can't improve, the board can't improve going forward. So really my challenge is to each member agency to make your needs known, and the chair and CEO and the board will do their best to adapt and make sure you're getting the information that you need. So really, whether it was a public address to the City of Victoria, of the whole committee of the whole, or an update to the Songhees Nation, our message really has been consistent over the last year. We are stewarding some of Victoria's most loved places, and that's very, very important to the board, while maintaining a triple bottom line approach to our increasingly important working harbor. And I can assure you that those two words, working harbor, are never absent from any of our board discussions. We really appreciate your support, advice, and counsel as we move forward together. So if we could move on to the next slide about the Ogden Point Master Plan. If you think back a year ago, that was something very topical for the board. So I'll just cover where we are today. So within the scope of our decision-making as board of directors, there really has been no single project that has had as much attention as the Ogden Point Master Plan. It's been in development for more than 12 years and has had considerable investment of time by both staff and board. And through various iterations, we understood that to proceed with the plan as envisioned really would require a leap of faith into increasingly difficult territory. Ogden Point is a very complicated site indeed. We worked with an outside consultant, very skilled, Jonathan Huggett, and asked him to provide a deep and thorough review of everything that had been created and envisioned for the future of that space at Ogden Point. Effectively, our board was determined to know if now is the time to proceed with a plan as ambitious as the Ogden Point Master Plan. Now, with the receipt of that report, combined with the outcomes of the full-scale emissions inventory for the deep water terminal, our board submitted a request to the City of Victoria Mayor and Council for an extension to the master plan planning process until December 31st, 2025. That length of time is very definitely needed to cover off some fundamental pieces that need to be done before anything can be built at Ogden Point. This extension will allow us to further develop an overall development narrative consistent with the James Bay Neighborhood Plan, which has not been finished yet. It's in the process of it will start soon, and that will be informative for Ogden Point. So after that, we'll be able to pursue appropriate master plan development opportunities that are really consistent with the organization's 10-year strategic plan. So we're in conversation now with the city, and the board feels very comfortable, particularly in light of the pandemic, with this plan. We'll go to the next slide. Also pivotal and informative to the master plan was the emissions inventory that staff and expert help undertook. In January 2019, we worked with Synergy Enterprises to develop a full-scale emissions inventory for the terminal to help identify where we could make improvements to emissions under our control and jurisdiction. So the report was delivered to our board in September, and then it was released publicly in October, in line with our presentation to the city. And the results, frankly, of the inventory were quite optimistic. It indicated that we could explore shore power to reduce emissions when vessels are in port, as well as find ways to reduce emissions from our buildings and our fleet vehicles. And the process for developing the business case for shore power was started. That was a key indicator from that report. So we've hired Moffett Nickel to do a very detailed analysis of shore power and to try and help us figure out how to move that project forward. The final report was delivered to the board in September of this year. So the report highlights the significant reductions that have taken place since 2010 in emissions at Ogden Point, with annual greenhouse gas emissions from this facility being equivalent to about 3,241 cars on the road as of 2018. So that is actually a fairly efficient footprint. That includes all shore transportation and all ship operations. GHG emissions from the cruise terminal in 2018, since 2010, CACs have decreased by 41%. SOx have been reduced by 95%, Particulate matter has been reduced by 79%, and cruise ship passenger counts have actually increased by 45%, while GHG emissions have only increased by 19% due to the increasingly stringent emission standards. So that is actually a very good track record. Cruise emissions, of course, account for about 96% of all emissions at the Victoria Cruise Terminal, and that is why shore power is an important project to look at. We can move on to the next slide. For governance and accountability, our board has spent the better part of the past year working on an improved path to chair policy that will allow for more consistent transfer of responsibility and knowledge in the succession planning for our 13 directors. And I'm very pleased to state that this process, which will utilize the position of a vice chair, more formally, was approved unanimously by the board of directors in March 2020. And if we could just now touch on COVID-19 and where the board is at with this unprecedented, very uncertain, and quite frankly, unbelievable set of circumstances. As past year, Bill Walburn was mentioning before, we got online and convened the meeting. In terms of probability, we would have scored this very, very low. The impact is very, very high. It's a black swan event, and it is a killer with 0 crews in a given year. This these terms that we use to describe something of this scope really have come home to roost with the board. The impact of the global coronavirus pandemic is going to be felt by GVHA and our entire community for years to come, and that's really the truth. The plans that we set today are not just for 2020. They're going to merge into 21 and probably 22. While there is no ability to predict the length or depth of the impact beyond what we know today, particularly on the world travel market, specifically cruise travel, our organization is faced with the reality that the cruise season, what we realized early in the year was that it had the earliest start date of July 1, 2020, and the board really kicked into gear at that point to try and adapt. And then, of course, that cruise ban was extended until October 31st of this year. And that severely impacts GVHA's revenues for the coming fiscal year. However, what has been paramount on the board's mind, as well as with Ian and his staff, is the health and safety of everybody at Ogden Point and our community. It's our top priority when it comes to welcoming cruise passengers to Victoria when that resumes. That's not going to change. What will change is how we address this pandemic in the months and years to come, and that's very much a dynamic situation. And we talk weekly. The committee chairs meet weekly. The board is meeting very frequently in order to adapt as necessary. It's important to note that the revenues from cruise ship arrivals help maintain our infrastructure at the Deepwater Terminal, as well as across our community amenities. The spaces that Victorians love, such as the Ogden Point Breakwater, Ship Point, and the Inner Harbour Lower Causeway, are maintained through multi-year capital project planning and ongoing repair and maintenance work. And all of that is funded, or a majority of that is funded by cruise revenue. If we can move on to the next slide, I'm going to hand the baton over to Ian Robertson, our CEO, and he'll report from the staff's perspective. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, Dave, and good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. As Dave has mentioned, today is Orange Shirt Day in honor of the Indigenous children that were sent away to residential schools. And I was reflecting on today, I have some property up in the Gulf Islands, and on my way to that property, I have the opportunity to stop in on a ferry at Penellicut Island. And Penellicut Island was the site of a residential school. So I do reflect on the challenges, the hardship, and the atrocities that the Indigenous children suffered. And as an organization, we are committed as staff, and as Dave has mentioned, the board, to understanding and committing to reconciliation and advancing the respect and mutual understanding with all Indigenous peoples and communities. So I just wanted to reflect on that for a moment. Brian, next slide, please. This morning, I'd like to quickly speak to 6 key areas. I want to talk about our Refocused business plan. I want to also touch upon a Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business and our Progressive Aboriginal Relation program that we're on. Dave has talked about the Ogden Point Master Plan. I'll just reflect on that. Talk about infrastructure challenges and what we're doing about it, the sustainable growth of cruise, and some of the enhancements that we've made down at the Breakwater District at Ogden Point. Brian, next slide, please. So as Dave mentioned, there was a reset of the Ogden Point Master Plan. And as a result of some good work that the consultant Jonathan Huggett had done, the board, along with management's support, requested an extension on for the Ogden Point Master Plan until 2025. And we are working through an MOU with city staff as we speak. Next slide, please, Brian. As a result of the master plan no longer being a key and primary focus for the organization, I've taken the decision to kind of reset the business plan, and what we have here is really kind of the highlights of where our business plan is focusing. The first one is ensure the long-term sustainability of cruise, and this is not just the economic sustainability, but also the environmental and the social sustainability of cruise. And much is in the news around cruise, and I'll touch upon that a little later when we talk about the outlook for cruise in the upcoming years. We've also refocused on completion of all the facility condition assessments. This is the equivalent of doing an MRI on all of our facilities. We've committed to doing 14 FCAs, and we've done 11 to date, and have 3 more to complete, and they are in progress as we speak. Also to develop an investment strategy that strives for long-term financial sustainability, probably even more important in the year that we are having right now. Continued focus on our community amenities, continued focus on internal organizational improvements. We are working hard on resetting and recalibrating new long-term agreements for our clients. Most of our agreements have gone year to year, and we've heard loud and clear from our customers, our clients, a desire to have more of a long-term commitment from us as an organization, and we couldn't agree more. So that's a good example of what we are working on. We know that retaining and attracting staff is always an important, and again, no more important than in this year. So we are focusing on a HR strategy, and as I talked about, continue to explore and implement ways in which we can ensure a triple bottom line focus at all of our properties. That is the Refocused business plan, and a copy of this revised business plan is up on our website. Next slide, please, Brian. Thank you. I mentioned at the outset the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business and the Progressive Aboriginal Relations Program. And this is a program that we undertook in 2019. It helps us to understand what our work is in Indigenous relations and how we are doing. And it's not so much about getting a gold, silver, or a bronze accreditation, which is available through the PAR program, but it's really ensuring that our organization is focused against monitoring and tracking our efforts. And I'm very proud of the efforts that we've made, and I wanted to extend a special shout out to Judy Kitts, who is our First Nations Engagement Manager, who has led this project with full support from myself and also our board. Next slide, please, Brian. I talked about infrastructure challenges. We faced them head on in 2019. Very proud of the completion of the mooring dolphin extension. I think when I was reporting a year ago, I was talking about some lost steel that went over side of a ship. And I'm very proud of the way in which our staff responded to that, and we're able to complete this project. I won't say on time, but on time given the challenges that we faced, and within the budgeted forecast. And I look forward to to welcoming the first ship to be able to tie up to this new piece of infrastructure. We also collaborated with the City of Victoria on repairing Ship Point. Very successful project, and I think is just a really good example of how we can collaborate with other partners. And I'm looking forward to future opportunities to collaborate with the City of Victoria on this. Dave touched upon the shore power feasibility study. We started this kind of in Q3 of our previous fiscal year. Dave mentioned that we presented a report to the board in September, and board has asked us to look at the specific recommendations made in that report, and we will report back to the board with next steps and a recommendation in December. We completed a new pedestrian ramp coming off the terminal at Dallas Road. This allowed for the safe movement of passengers off the terminal and out to explore Victoria. We also worked on lowering our masts at Ogden Point and relamping, and that's resulted in significant cost and environmental savings. We've also continued to ensure that our facilities are able to welcome cruise when it returns. We've made some upgrades to the bollards, and we've also implemented a composting and organic recycling program down at Fisherman's Wharf. Next slide, please, Brian. Talked about the sustainable growth of cruise, and that continues to be a focus. And I know there's much discussion around what will cruise look like in the future. But at least for the 2019 year, it was another record year, another strong year, where we welcomed 256 ships and over 700,000 passengers. We were able to welcome some new ships to Victoria. So all in all, it was another strong year for cruise, not just for Victoria, but also for the Alaska itinerary. Next slide, please. Also in 2019, a highlight was the rebranding to the Breakwater District at Ogden Point, really focusing in on what visitors and residents love about that particular area. And it sets a real tone for how future development can happen down at this innovative and exciting area where Victorians and residents like to enjoy. Next slide, please, Brian. That's it for me. It now is a pleasure for me to introduce Judith Ethier, our CAO, who will present the financial statements for our previous fiscal year. Judith, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Ian, and good morning, everyone. Next slide, Brian. For the member agency reps, included in your package are complete audited financial statements for the fiscal year end 1920. And for those guests on the call, the financials will be on our website in the next few days once approved. For the fiscal year ending March 31st, it was a great year for GVHA, being our strongest year, both for revenue and from cash from operations yet. We performed better than budget in both revenues and expenses. If you look at the statements, the shipping revenues combined with a cruise sustainability fee brought us 64% of our revenue this year. The marinas and attractions brought 15% of our revenue. Commercial real property, which is all of our commercial operators across all of our facilities, was at about 17% of revenue. From an expense perspective, we were able to save based on budget expenses in some areas while adjusting for the growth in others. So led by a strong cruise season and growth of the marinas, we ended up with an EBITDA of 3.6 million against a budget of 2.9. So we saw a 24% increase in that cash from operations. From that cash, we were able to spend 7.3 million on capital, with a large portion of that being the Dolphin project that Ian had mentioned that was completed earlier this year. Next slide. Looking ahead, one of GVHA's guiding principles is on financial self-sustainability. We maintain a 20-year long-range plan to monitor the ability to sustain our facilities and our operations while being able to give back to the community. The January column on this slide is pre-COVID. where our long-range plan had expected to generate 118 million cash from operations from the growth of cruise, which is about 70% growth over the 20-year period. 70% of our revenue stream over the 20-year period. At this point, we know that it takes about 52 million to keep our facilities operational in terms of capital investment, but we also expect that that figure will be adjusted in the next couple of months when the FCAs at the Breakwater District are completed. In addition to that, we're expecting about 24 million worth of investment in our community assets. And from that, we were aiming to strive for 70% of the funding for those community asset improvements to come from government grants. And that's the 17 million number on your screen. These community asset improvements are mostly centered on the Lower Causeway and Ship Point, as well as rebuilding the public boat launch at the Breakwater District. What you'll notice that hasn't been factored into our long-range plans at the moment are areas of growth at the facilities, such as the future development based on the master plan, any installation of shore power, or any new dock facilities at the marinas, such as Johnson Street. However, pre-COVID, we were comfortable that the 60 million was going to give us plenty of flexibility for the future to take on some of these growth initiatives. Now, in the midst of COVID, we're having to make some adjustments to the long-range plan. So you can see from the September column, it's fundamentally the same for right now, except for that cash from operations. So with 1 year of no cruise and very little tourism, our cash availability has already been reduced by 6 million. If the safe return of cruise takes a few years to return to a pre-COVID passenger levels, our long-range plan will continue to be impacted by these lower cash levels. In addition, if tourism overall remains weak, our cash will continue to erode. At the same time, our requirements for capital investments in the facilities hasn't changed, but our ability to react has. This is very concerning for us as we still have an obligation to steward these facilities and provide them to the customers and the public. If you consider it another way, our community assets, such as the Breakwater, the Lower Causeway, and Ship Point, generate very little, if any, revenue for the organization. We rely and require the revenue from tourism and cruise specifically to continue to provide access to these attractions to the public. The longer these revenue streams are in jeopardy, the harder it's going to be for us to provide these facilities. Next slide. So if we look at a little more granular level, the forecast for this year has had to adjust based on the impact of the pandemic. Our loss of the cruise season, which was our focus for 2021, has now shifted to managing our expenses and trying to mitigate the potential losses. We've seen a decline in revenues from a budget of 18.1 million to our current forecast of 4.1. This recognized the loss of the entire cruise season, along with an estimated 80 to 90% loss of marine activities, and also the impact of our contributions towards the SECRA program for our commercial operators. Our expenses have been cut over 8 million or 55%. The remaining costs are mostly fixed in nature as we've had to keep all the facilities open and operational. This is leading us to a projected loss right now of 2.8 million. That swing of almost $6 million from the budgeted gain of 2.9 million is mostly due to the impact of cruise and to a lesser extent the tourism season. One item to note is as we start looking ahead for the safe return of cruise for the 2021 season, we've got to anticipate some of the investments that are going to have to be made in the facilities to allow for that safe return, and those haven't been impacted into the forecast yet as we're still working through that. So that 2.8 million is probably on the generous side at this point. Because of the delay of the cruise season and the decline of cash, we've also had to postpone about 5.8 million of capital investments in the year, but we are still going ahead with about 700,000. Next slide. So, as I've mentioned, cruise needs to return safely in order for GVHA to be sustainable. Right now, we don't know if, when, or what that magnitude of return might look like. Any impacts to passenger volumes will most likely impact our ability to operate safely in the future. While cruise may be 70% of our business, the remaining 30% comes from travel and tourism. Declines in this industry will continue to impact the customers at our marinas as well as our own operations. While in the short term, we can defer capital as a means to manage cash, we cannot keep that practice up in the long term. The assets will start to decline rapidly if we ignore them. So in the 20-year horizon, while it may look favorable right now, in a longer term view, we've got some challenges ahead of us. In the short term, we actually, if you look at the cash that we have on hand, as well as what's available for our line of credit and our investments, from a cash perspective, we have about 3 years of cash available to run if cruise wasn't to return for any of those 3 years. So it's definitely not a favorable situation for us or for many Victorian businesses at this moment, but we're working hard to maintain the business, the facilities, and our staff. We are optimistic that a safe return of cruise can happen in 2021, which will support not only our organization, but many of the businesses in the region that rely on the economic boost. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. I'd like to remind everybody that there is an excellent management discussion and analysis that accompanies the official audited financial reports of the Harbour Authority that was included in your meeting package. And that should inform you as we move to the next part of the agenda, which is approval of the financial statements for the year ending March 31st, 2020. So may I please ask for a motion to approve the financial statements for the year ending March 31st, 2020?
So moved. Second, Kevin.
Thank you. And through the ranks and approval, any questions before we do that? Questions about the financial statements? Any discussion about the financial statements? Okay, hearing none, all in favor?
Kevin Murdoch in favor.
And I sit in favor.
Paul Nursey in favor.
Katie Hooper in favor.
John Wilson in favor.
Yeah, Chief Sam here in favor.
Jacob Hellawell in favor.
Lyle Sotart in favor.
Okay, thank you, representatives. We will consider them the financial statements approved, and on to the next slide. We would like to appoint KPMG as detailed in your package as the auditors for the year ending March 31st, 2021. Can I please ask for somebody to move approval?
So moved approval. Kevin here.
Second?
Second,
Chief Sam here. Yep.
Okay, any discussion? Questions? Hearing none, all in favor?
Kevin Murdoch approved.
And I sit in favor.
Paul Nursey in favor.
Katie Hooper in favor.
John Wilson in favor.
Chief Sam in favor. Thank you.
Jacob Hellawell in favor.
Lyle Sotart in favor.
Thank you very much. Now we move on to the portion of the agenda where the member agency representatives are able to bring forward questions or have a discussion. This is a very important part of the meeting. So you have been briefed through the package. We've gone through the core business of today. So now's a good time to ask staff or the board. We've got some of our committee chairs on the line in the background. If we get into something that needs a little bit more depth from the board's perspective. And I look forward to any perspective that you might want to share. So we'll open the floor. I think Ian's got his mic on, and between the two of us, we'll happy to facilitate a discussion or answer questions.
It's Kevin Murdoch here. I just have one question, and that's just related in the presentation about the fiscal future planning. It was mentioned that, and I'm sure it's true, that there's going to be a fair bit of investment required to allow for safe embarking and disembarking of the ships under new rules. So do you have any sense of the capital requirements that might come out of that as cruise ships start to return? What the cost is going to be just to get the facilities ready, or is that still waiting and seeing based on best practices?
Ian?
Yeah, Dave, I'm happy to respond. Kevin, thanks for the question. You know what? It's a really good question. What I can tell you is that we have established a cruise resumption team made up of most of the leadership team from the organization, along with our partners, Western Stevedoring, who manage the cruise operations side of the business. The answer is we don't know yet. What we have in front of us is we're watching the safe return of crews in Europe. One major line, MSC, has been successfully sailing now for 7 weeks and making ports of calls. And we've been watching the protocols that they have in place. And so as part of this cruise resumption team and working with our partners, Western Stevedoring, we've got a briefing actually next week from Western on what they can foresee may be required. Immediately I think about, will we have to make adjustments and modifications to our facilities for better movement of air? That could be one. What we're also waiting on is, what does disembarkation look like? I noticed in the protocols laid out by the cruise lines last week in their presentation to the CDC, there was a separate area around destination and excursion planning. And some of the recommendations suggest that perhaps disembarkation will be limited to just scheduled shore excursions. So in other words, passengers won't be allowed to get off and visit Victoria. And we're taking that into consideration and thinking about how we could bring Victoria to the Breakwater District. So the short answer is we don't know yet, but I expect over the next 6 to 8 weeks, we'll have a better understanding of what types of capital, what types of adjustments to our infrastructure that we'll need to take.
Thank you very much, Ian.
Thank you, Kevin. Another comment or question?
That's Paul Garcia. I have one quick question, Dave, if I may.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I think what we're becoming abundantly aware of is that there will be considerable economic stimulus from the provincial and, of course, the federal government. But two of the key lenses will be environmental sustainability and being shovel ready. So is there an opportunity, or is GVHA getting close to being shovel ready with shore power project? And could this be a more nimble opportunity to perhaps advance that project?
Yeah, Paul, thanks. Yeah, again, great question. One of the challenges that we've got is, the timing could be right from a federal government environmental programs perspective. There could be some funding that might be available, but right now the stars aren't aligned, because one of the factors that's very important to us is that there needs to be investment by the users. In other words, we need to see investment by the cruise lines in order to make this financially sustainable. And that's a challenge right now, obviously, with the cruise lines and the state that they're in. So we will be making final recommendations to the board in December. But again, lots of moving parts. While there may be significant opportunities for funding at the federal level, the funding from the private sector, i.e. the cruise lines, just the timing's not good. But not to say that it couldn't happen. It may be delayed. So I'm not in a position right now, Paul, to kind of comment on, when we might see, if we might see shore power installed out at the Victoria cruise ship terminal.
Ian, maybe if I could just add, one piece of context, Paul. That all being said, the Harbour Authority is doing everything possible on its end to get the homework done in order to have the projects as ready as possible in terms of, the facility condition assessments for all the assets, but also doing the big study that Moffett Nickel has done was a significant investment for the Harbour Authority to make. And the board and staff are very committed to getting those projects as ready as possible. But there are external forces that, as Ian said, aren't quite lined up. But on the Harbour Authority end, I suppose it's fair to say, Ian, we're as ready as we can be, given the time that we've had.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, with the fact that, the master plan is no longer in play, we do have reduced staff, so I'm not going to, suggest that our bandwidth is open. It's always going to be a challenge, but I'm very pleased with the initial report provided to us by GVHA or by Moffett and Nickel, and we're working through those recommendations. It's just we'll be ready. It's just a question of, can we put the finances together, and is the business case sound for us to pursue at this time?
And of course, the other important point is when that project or others go forward to the federal government, the support of the member agencies will be really important to signal that the community supports that particular project. So another question or comment?
Yeah, I had a question, Davis Lau Sotart.
Go ahead, Lau.
I'm just wondering, I mean, it's a difficult question, but obviously everybody's thinking about it. What is the board and management looking to do in terms of diversifying revenue streams? I know that the breakwater plan is on the back burner, but it seems to me that might be a real opportunity to look at other areas that might bring in revenue that isn't as cruise ship dependent. Although it's clear to me that the cruise ship industry is very beneficial to Victoria and to the Harbour Authority. But I wondered if you guys were looking at anything else at this moment.
Sure. Why don't you speak from the staff side and first, Ian?
Yeah, Lyle, thanks for the question. And the answer is an emphatic yes. We are looking at all opportunities to diversify our revenue stream in the short term, what we'll call low-hanging fruit, and also in the mid to long term. I think one of the natural discussion points and opportunities for growth is at Fisherman's Wharf. As part of the Fisherman's Wharf plan that was developed some years ago, it called for further development towards the west, in other words, towards the direction where the commercial commercial fishing boats are located. One of the challenges is infrastructure, that we can't expand and increase revenue opportunities without significant investment in services such as water, hydro. So there clearly needs to be that strong business case in order to identify and to see what opportunities are there. But yes, it's very much on our mind. We're also looking at within the Inner Harbour and to see if there's a way we can diversify the mix of what I'll call recreational and commercial vessels. Obviously, right now it tilts significantly towards the recreational boats, but is there an opportunity to perhaps transition that more to commercial to give us more of a long-term sustainable revenue opportunity? So the answer is yes, and we are exploring every opportunity that we can.
From the board's perspective, we just had our strategic retreat, Lyle, and the message was clear that we all landed on the button of diversification where possible, but optimizing what we have. The cost of doing a major development at Ogden Point really was a barrier that came up when we had an independent analyst look at it. The reality today is Harbour Authority does have a material revenue stream right now from its other properties. So the commercial real estate side is getting us through in reduced capacity right now. And hopefully that can continue to grow. So as Ian said and alluded to, you know, those next business ideas, Harbour Authority is open for business. So if there are ideas, please bring them forward. The art is bringing that working harbor perspective and the community expectations to deliver in some of Harbour Authority sites, because we have to be mindful of the impact on the community, and ultimately we have to work with the city to get approval. And there have been some short-term use ideas that have gone to Ian that he sorted through and sifted, but ultimately they have to meet the city's approval and be acceptable to the community. So I don't know if you want to put any more perspective on that, Ian?
Yeah, I think the only comment I would add is that, you know, there have been some short-term opportunities that have come to us to utilize some of the area down to the Breakwater District at Ogden Point. But the city bylaws and zoning requirements have been a challenge, and we need to work through those. We have a great relationship with the city, and we continue to, you know, funnel up any opportunities that might exist. The other comment I'll make is recently we did a request for expressions of interest to redevelop Huron Pier. Huron Pier is at the west end of Fisherman's Wharf, and it's used by the commercial fishermen to unload the fish. As the member agency reps might recall, we had to shut that facility down about a year ago due to the fact it wasn't safe for vehicle traffic. This RFEOI that we sent out was to not only refurbish the fuel dock, but to look at opportunities to combine that with Huron Pier. And this was done pre-COVID, but we only had one expression come back, and that was to not look at Huron, but to look mainly at the fuel dock. So we have tried to look out. I think there's more that we can do. I think that there's, as I alluded to, opportunities in the Inner Harbour that we continue to explore. And as Dave said, we're open for business. We're open to any ideas and suggestions from our member agencies as to how we could look at making better utilization, and I would say optimization of our properties.
Definitely. Good question, Lyle. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Other comments, questions? Randy, I know you're on the line, so I'd just like to acknowledge you as a life member of the Harbour Authority.
Thanks, Dave. I've got a question, if I'm allowed.
Go ahead, yeah.
So Judith was talking about on the financials that you've got a line of credit as well as the revenue coming in that you can get through 3 years. I'm wondering, and I've been in several Zoom calls, as all of you guys have through the last few weeks, is that we don't get any crews in 21. So are we planning to go to 22 with the business plan? 1. 2 is, and been in some provincial calls on that infrastructure point from Paul, that there is infrastructure money for tourism from Mr. Horrigan's recent announcement of the 1.5 billion. So when you say you're ready to go, we should be looking into that because it is tourism and infrastructure. But I'm wondering, not being pessimistic, I mean, it's a moving target. You know, Disney went and laid off 28,000 today in their crews as well. But I think, and I'm dealing with a board meeting coming up right after this on the next 3 years, the actual plan for marketing British Columbia. It's looking like it could be a while, and whether we get 21 in. So I guess my point is, and question is, that you're preparing that it's going to be 22 and that we can survive, I guess, to Ian.
Yeah. So if your question is, Randy, and quite honestly, as we get into the budgeting process, which is beginning for us in the next 3 to 4 weeks, I will be presenting 2 budgets to the board. One with what I'll call the conservative return of cruise and obviously a revenue and expense number that reflects that, and then no return. That's something that we clearly have to think about, and we are. And to answer your question, yeah, we could survive through 21, financially survive through 21 with no cruise, and be able to sustain the organization financially through to 22. Not sure if that answers your question, but that's kind of where we're going.
No, it does. And you're living off the reserve fund right now, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Geez, Bill, that was not a bad idea a bunch of years ago to throw that in there. As I had said, that could be a problem if we lost cruise. Okay, well, I just, the tea leaves with myself and dealing with governments, etc. That's going to be an uphill battle on trying to get a cruise season in for next year. I'm not optimistic on that, the way things are going at the moment. As we know, Quebec, is spiking.
Yeah.
I think the magic number is 100 with Bonnie Henry and the U.S. border, etc. So I think you're doing that. You did answer my question and planning for that. The worst, I guess. I'm hoping for the best.
Yeah. Sorry.
Well, and from the board's perspective, Randy, our December meeting is all about scenario discussion. So staff are going to be laying out, as Ian said, all of the scenarios from zero to break even and maybe a little bit optimistically beyond that. So yeah, we'll be looking at all the hard realities of each of those scenarios. We have to, and really we did that at the beginning of the summer, and we're just continuing with that kind of scenario-based planning because, what we thought was impossible before is happening. So we have to open our eyes up to those realities.
Yeah, thanks, David. One of the other scenarios, Randy, I mean, there's a conservative return to cruise, no cruise. And then there's also another option, another scenario that I will be walking the board through, and that is, what if there's no cruise, but yet the borders open up, which means we get the American boaters up. It means that we see increased traffic down at places like Fisherman's Wharf. How do we run that operation with no cruise and 70% of our revenue gone? And that's a real challenge. And I think that was one of the challenges that, I'll be honest, when I look back this last season, I don't think we anticipated. In other words, we kind of, the reaction was, 70% of our revenue's gone, reduced staff. But then we kind of had to remember that, we still got 33 float home owners. We've still got liveaboards. We've still got operations that run, and we can't cut back on those. We still saw 65-70% occupancy overall in our harbor marinas, and that takes staff to bring in those boats. So it's going to be a real challenge. So there will be 3 scenarios that I'll be walking the board through as we begin our planning session. And again, I could spend a lot of time talking about what we're hearing around the return of cruise. Quite honestly, I think the most optimistic view will be that we won't see the return of cruise maybe in May. It could be delayed till June or July, and that's what I would call the conservative view on the return of cruise. Again, I think watching what happens in Italy with MSC, watching what happens with some of the U.S. Sailings in North America down to the Caribbean and Mexico, maybe in January, a lot to consider. But the challenge is for us, we do need to plan like we are going to see the return of cruise. We can't wait until maybe government opens it up within 30 days and all of a sudden within 30 days we go. We've got to begin the planning now. And that's what I talked about in terms of this cruise resumption team. So yeah, sorry for the long-winded answer, but we're considering all different types of scenarios.
Yeah, thanks. You've got 3 different scenarios, which obviously you guys are working on. So yeah, so that's good. Okay, thank you.
Dave, can I just jump in for a second?
Go ahead, Judy.
Maybe, just to clarify, Randy, we've got enough cash in the bank for a year and a half of no cruise. before we would have to touch the line of credit and our restricted reserve fund. So even if cruise didn't come back in 2021, we're still in a comfortable position. If it starts to extend out to 2022 or 2023, that's where we would have to start pulling funds out of our investment account.
Understand. Thank you.
Thanks.
Dave,
Question.
Christine here. May I make a comment?
Go ahead.
Thank you for the thoughtful and good questions from everyone so far. As incoming chair, the one comment that I would like to make is that the way that we, GVHA, and all of the Greater Victoria business community and general community, public, will be successful is by working together. That means that when ideas for diversification, ideas for different growth and use need to be considered with an open mind and provide us with the opportunity to look at all of our revenue streams so that we can bridge the gap, whether that's cruise returning a year later than anticipated or tourism traffic being affected. So I just throw that out there that our strength is our member agencies, it's our community, it's working together. Dave alluded, or perhaps it was Ian, sorry, earlier to the fact that, to Paul's question, when there is funding available, that we get support from our member agencies as we go to the federal and provincial government, so that we can ride through this crisis, because certainly I think the community has seen that the impact of no cruise goes beyond GVHA. So I just throw that out there as the incoming chair, that I look forward to working with the member agencies and the community for all of us to be successful.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Do we have another comment or question from member agency representative?
One final question. I hate to hog the mic.
Go ahead, Lyle.
It was around the Rock Bay Ocean Futures Innovation Hub. And we were just wondering what your thoughts on that. Obviously, as a member agency, I prefer to see that out at the breakwater. Were you involved in those discussions with the city, and were a participant in that or not? And just curious on your thoughts on that.
So very good question, Ian.
To be quite candid, Lyle, the announcement caught us by surprise. We're thrilled that there's this opportunity within the city of Victoria. As soon as the announcement was made, I signaled to Mayor Helps that if there was an opportunity for there to be two sites, a site A and then a satellite site, that we would welcome that opportunity to have that discussion for the breakwater district at Ogden Point. I reminded the mayor that we have 4 deep water berths and lots of space. So I'm hoping and hopeful and optimistic that there may be an opportunity for us to partner with the city of Victoria for some type of development down at the breakwater district.
You touch on an important piece, Lyle. When it comes to the harbor, kind of along the lines of what Christine just said, we really do need to come together, and we depend on VEHS for some of that insight or connection into the harbor community about what's going on, or maybe to Councillor Is it on the line to hear what the city is thinking, because I think we know we can always communicate better as vested harbor stakeholders, and that really is a key goal of the Harbour Authority Board, to help catalyze that discussion. We all wear our own lenses, and sometimes we're not aware of everything that's going on, but that's an opportunity maybe where the ball is still rolling, and maybe it can turn into something that includes the Harbour Authority. If Bill Walburn's still on the line, just from the financial perspective, Bill, we are benefiting from all the years of good financial stewardship at the Harbour Authority, and I've been on the board for 10 years, and I can tell you that the financial focus has always been paramount, along with the mission of the Working Harbour, supporting the Working Harbour and our First Nations economic development. If you're still there, do you have any comments about moving forward or the foundations that were set back when you were chair? I think I'm getting the note that Bill might not be on the line. Okay, well, I can tell you every chair that has stewarded the Harbour Authority has had a strong financial focus. So I saw Judith nodding her head there. You know, there are a lot of good controls and mechanisms in place to get us through this particular pandemic. And as evidence of that fact, I think it's quite extraordinary that the Harbour Authority can, despite the loss of revenue, still commit to the shore power feasibility study, which was very expensive. The whole Harbour economic impact study, which is very, very important for all of the member agencies, and those facility condition assessments. So despite all of the economic pressure, 3 very important building blocks are still being worked on in 2020. So I think that's quite extraordinary. I know a lot of companies that just stopped everything, whereas Harbour Authority is still able to work on some strategic projects. And that credit really goes to the staff and to the governance of the organization. So are there any other closing comments, questions? We do have a community information session right after this. Quick deck. Chief Sam.
Dave, it's Ron here, Chair.
Go ahead, Ron.
Did you see Star's question to you in the chat?
I am blind on the chat. Brian, can you help me with that? Thank you,
Yeah,
Chief.
Absolutely. So I'll read it in Star's voice. Dave, as this is your last AGM as chair of this organization, do you have any one idea or thought that has surfaced for you over the years as it relates to the GVHA's commitment to a working harbor, its ownership of many iconic community assets, and the overall relationship with the greater community at large?
That's a small question. Sure, I'll be brief. You know, in my experience on the board, the challenge of bringing the aspects of the working harbor and the community together have been very real. But that's what defines the form and character of Victoria's inner harbor. It's that working element along with the community that lives seaside. I think you know, what the harbor needs is a plan. It needs a master plan that all of the stakeholders feel they've had material input to, and feel that addresses the various needs and tensions around the harbor. And I think most of those tensions are quite healthy. I think there's a recognition in the community and at council that the harbor is important. But every year that goes by that we don't have a whole harbor plan that defines a role for each of the stakeholders, we lose opportunity. And we lose the opportunity to stand together as a community when these funding opportunities from government come up. We need that uniting vision. And I suppose that's the challenge for Christine as she comes in from the Harbour Authority's perspective and to Ian to continue to catalyze that discussion. Personally, I think a common discussion point that can bring the working harbor elements in the community together and the city is the harbor pathway. You know, we're all wanting people to be able to move around our city with low carbon footprint, and what better way to do it than walking harborfront and being able to view some of the amazing harborfront businesses and activity that happens on our harbor. We know that 1/3 of cruise passengers, which is amazing, walk into town, and that is a tremendous economic opportunity that's unrealized, frankly. So, you know, I think the challenge for our South Island community, because the harbor is a regional asset, is to come up with a long-term vision for the harbor that addresses its working harbor needs and requirements, and then balances out the community needs as well. And that should be a good constructive dialogue that we all participate in. And I would look forward to participating in something like that and as a citizen, frankly. So Chief, that would be my answer, and a strong part of that is going to be continued dialogue with the Esquimalt and Songhees because of the long history that's there. And there's certainly a role for Aboriginal economic development around the harbour. And I think that needs to be a strong piece of whatever gets delivered in the future. So Ian, I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that. That's what I think in a nutshell.
None for me at this point, Dave. I think out of just a desire to move through to the community information meeting. If there's no other questions from the member agencies, happy to kind of continue that discussion in that particular venue.
Okay, if any closing comments or questions? If not, I would like to thank you all for attending Harbour Authority's annual general meeting, and to the member agency reps for your time investment. It's very much appreciated. If I could ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
And second?
Second.
I'll second. Ron here.
Thank you, Ron. And assuming no discussion, all in favor?
In favor, Kevin?
Or Katie?
And I sit in favor.
Wilson in favor.
Yeah, Ron again. I'm in favor.
Yeah, Jacob in favor.
Wow, so Dart in favor.
Okay, we stand adjourned, and we're going to go immediately into the community information session. And I will pass over to Ian for this portion.
Okay, there we go. So thanks everyone, and welcome to GVHA's community information meeting. We do have some slides, but really for me, it's important for us to hear from the community. So I will move through the slides fairly quickly and to get to a point where we can have a discussion. Before I begin, I would like to indicate that we have GVHA's leadership team joining me. So if there's any questions, any detailed questions that I'm not able to answer, I'll certainly defer to my colleagues. But before I begin, I do want to acknowledge that this community information meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen peoples. We're very proud of our relationship with the Songhees Nation and Esquimalt Nation, and we're very proud and honored to steward their properties. Next slide, please, Brian. Thank you. So just a reminder, our assets are broad and extend from the Breakwater District at Ogden Point right through into the Inner Harbour. It's a wide-ranging facilities, and just in this time of COVID, I do want to thank especially our operations team, our maintenance team, who have been looking after our facilities, looking after our customers, making sure our facilities are clean and safe, and also to our Inner Harbour Marina team. Very challenged in the sense that, you know, we've had to reduce staff, and they've done just an amazing job. We are still seeing occupancy in the 65 to 70% range, and that's 7 days a week, and takes a lot. So very, very proud of the team that helps us to steward these properties. And just a reminder coming up that if you've got any questions for me or for the team, to please use the Q&A feature as we move along. Next slide, please, Brian. This was covered in our annual general meeting, and I'm noting that the significant majority of the people are still on the line that were at the AGM. As we head into this current fiscal year, we do have some financial headwinds. There's no question about it. COVID has had a significant impact upon our business with the loss of crews. We've lost 70% of our revenue. And as you can see, we've had to make some significant adjustments to our capital and to our operating expenses. Next slide, please, Brian. Thank you. Again, this slide was shared in the AGM. There are a lot of numbers here, but I would like to point out that long term, over the 20-year long range plan, with the loss of crews this year, we were forecasting to see cash in about 25 years to be in the neighborhood of $61 million, and with the loss of crews this year, that is projected to decline to about $55 million. Next slide, please, Brian. Thank you. I just wanted to touch upon 4 areas that we've been focused in on. The mooring dolphin, also the achievements we've had around green marine, around shore power, and also our facility condition assessments. Next slide, please, Brian. Green marine, before we touch upon, well, I'll just touch upon green marine. We're very proud of this. This is for our facility at the Victoria Cruise Ship Terminal, and we were able to achieve a certification of 3.7 up from 3.3. And the average ranking for North American ports is 2.8. So we're very pleased with this particular ranking. It makes us one of the most sustainable ports in North America from an environmental perspective. And I want to give a shout out to our partners at Western Stevedoring, who also played a key role in this area. Next slide, please, Brian. Shore power. We've had some discussion on this. This project started in January. When COVID hit, we made the decision to continue with this project, a very expensive project for the organization, but we felt that it was important for the long-term sustainability of cruise to examine this. A lot has changed since we last looked at the feasibility of shore power some years ago. We are seeing larger ships, more modern ships, and we are seeing ships spending longer in port in Victoria, and we're seeing increases in ships. So it was prudent for us to revisit this again. As we discussed in the AGM, we've received an interim report from Moffat and Nichol that was presented to our board in September. Staff, we have the next steps to evaluate that report in greater detail and make some final recommendations to our board in December. Next slide, please. Facility condition assessments, probably the most important project that we are undertaking right now. We've always had a good line of sight on the condition of our assessments, but I don't believe we've ever done as much of a detailed assessment as we are undertaking right now. We are looking at, we've identified 14 areas for the FCAs to be completed. We've completed 11. 3 more are underway right now at the Breakwater District at Ogden Point, and we will have these completed by the end of the year. And what this will give us is a really good look at the condition of our assessment, condition of our properties, and then it will allow us to set priorities and recommend to the board as to how we tackle, whether it's replacement, whether it's a significant repair, or as I said, complete replacement. So we'll have much more information and detailed assessments to be able to present to our board, along with recommendations in the new year. Next slide, please. Lots of conversation around the 2021 cruise season, and we talked about this in our AGM. At this point in time, as an organization, we are planning for the safe return of cruise, but there are a number of factors that are out of our control, that being when the Canadian government will open up ports to cruise. Right now, they are closed until October 31st. Quite frankly, I won't be surprised if this closure is extended into the new year. And I've been very clear, as has our board, that we will only welcome cruise when it is safe to do so. And I have complete confidence in Transport Canada, in Health Canada, and the Provincial Health Office here in British Columbia to make those key decisions. But we can't wait until those decisions are taken. We need to begin planning now from an operations perspective. and have developed an internal team called a cruise resumption team to begin that planning process. And we will do that in conjunction with our partners at Western Stevedoring. And as I said, we are planning for the safe return of cruise. We optimistically think that cruise could return in June or July, and the ships may sail at 50 to 60% capacity. We are also looking at what the initial recommendations from the Healthy Safe Sail Cruise Panel and what their recommendations are around destination and excursion planning. I mentioned this in the AGM, but just to reinforce that at this point, there are recommendations that disembarkation of passengers will be limited to those that are on shore excursions. So what does that mean for the merchants and other operators in the downtown core? Well, we're looking at an opportunity to perhaps bring Victoria to the Breakwater District at Ogden Point, so we can maybe work with the cruise lines to allow passengers to disembark, but remain within a sealed, controlled area, that being the Breakwater District. So lots for us to think about, not only the operational side and the resumption of cruise, but also how we could allow the benefit of the return of cruise and open that up to other operators. Next slide, please. So that's it for our presentation. As I said, I wanted to make sure that we allowed ample time between now and 9:15. Right now, I've got the Q&A box open up, and happy to take any questions you may have. And Brian, am I missing anything?
No, I think if, of course, if anyone has questions after today's meeting, certainly feel free to reach out to us. Our general inbox is gvha@gvha.ca, and you can reach Ian at ceo@gvha.ca as well.
Maybe while I'm waiting for some questions to come in, I'll take the opportunity just to kind of, again, build on what we're hearing around cruise, and it continues to be a moving target. We're watching closely what is happening with MSC and their safe sailing in Italy. We know that the lines, the major lines, the lines that call on Victoria, are actively pursuing the return of cruise. They have made some recommendations to the US CDC, and the US CDC has extended the closure of cruise until the end of October. Some speculation that the US CDC could be waiting until after the US election to make some determination around that. And it's been a challenging time, because if we listen to our partners, the cruise lines, they will tell you that it's full speed ahead. So it's trying to balance out what we're hearing from the cruise lines with what I would call some reality. But we're in close contact with the ports up and down the West Coast. We enjoy a very, very strong relationship with our partners at the Port of Seattle. And we're also have played a leading role with ACPA, the Association of Canadian Port Authorities. We were pressing ACPA for the creation of a cruise committee, and ACPA have done that, and we have joined as a partner in their cruise committee. And the purpose of this is to advocate for the safe return of cruise. One of the points that I've been making to CLIA, the Cruise Line Industry Association, is just because the US CDC may accept the recommendations doesn't necessarily mean that that will follow suit in Canada. And there needs to be a Canadian lens on this. And again, I was able to connect CLIA with a leading Canadian epidemiologist based out of Toronto, who's agreed to look at the recommendations by the CDC and to put a Canadian lens on this. So We are well engaged with our counterparts across the country and also up and down the West Coast.
Ian, it's Dave here. Just, I think some of the participants might be interested to hear two things. One, just have you heard anything recently from Transport Canada on what some of the shore-based protocols might be? Of course, we all know the community will be very interested to hear. I'm sure City Council will be interested to hear. And of course, you're going to report out whatever we know as soon as we know it. So I guess it's still early a little bit on the Canadian side, but are you hearing any discussions from Ottawa? And then just secondly, off the topic of cruise, what kind of challenges have you had at other GVHA facilities since the pandemic hit?
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So we are engaged with Transport Canada. Their focus right now is on the continued safe movement of cargo. That is their first priority, but they have indicated to us and to CLIA that they will resume conversations in November. So that's what we're hearing from Transport Canada. I think that, you know, CLIA is doing the very best they can to position themselves that once they've got some indication from the US CDC on the protocols that have been recommended, then they'll have something that they can tweak to make it, you know, work for Canada, and make those recommendations to Transport Canada and Health Canada, and that's expected to happen in November. The second part of your question is, you know, what impact have we seen at our facilities? How has COVID impacted our facilities? I think I talked about this a little bit in a response to a question from Randy Wright. One of the things that I don't think we anticipated at the early start was the increased focus, if I could say that, or the increased demand pressure on facilities like Fisherman's Wharf, also on our Inner Harbour Marina. We were very fortunate for the Canadian government's various programs around queues. So wage subsidy that allowed us, excuse me, that allowed us to be able to bring back some seasonal staff to be able to adjust to the demand. I think we didn't understand, you know, what the kind of the interface would be between keeping and ensuring that the float home owners and residents were kept safe, and yet how to manage that interaction with visitors coming down to the commercial side of Fisherman's Wharf, and doing everything we can to ensure that especially the food and beverage operators were able to continue operating. So that caused us to have to adjust our staffing levels. And as I mentioned, you know, thankfully queues helped us with that. The other thing that I think was a bit of a surprise, then again, maybe it shouldn't have been, but it was the amount of vandalism and negative criminal consequences happening on our properties. That was something that I don't think we anticipated. And again, we reacted to, again, with queues. We were able to bring back our facilities security coordinator, who works 0.6 of a week, but able to come back and help us in that area to ensure that we had adequate staff training to deal with some of the challenges that we face. As I mentioned, you know, one of the scenarios that I am thinking about and will be presenting to the board, Dave, is just around, you know, what if there is no return to cruise, but yet we see the US border open up, and that means we're going to see an increase in American boaters come up, and also, you know, increased tourism traffic on our properties, and how do we manage that without that cruise revenue coming in? So those are some of the things that, as a leadership team, we're working through right now. Are there any other questions? And again, if, as Brian mentioned, if a question comes up, you think about it after we've ended this, this session, don't hesitate to reach out to me at ceo@gvha.ca. Happy to answer any of your questions. And I know that we will make plans to have this, this presentation, our AGM and community information meeting up on our website as well. So with that, I know we all have a busy day ahead of us. I want to thank you all for participating and joining us in on this call. And before I end, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to the staff that I have the pleasure of working with every day. And these have been just unprecedented times, and I'm so proud to lead this organization, so proud of the support that I have of the leadership team and everyone at GVHA. And if I can say one thing positive about COVID, I think it's brought our team closer together. And I want to thank them all for their support and their work as we work through these incredibly challenging times. So we'll stay informed. We'll keep you informed with what we're hearing around crews through our newsletters. And we are going to have more waterside chats. Those are sessions that have been developed where I have an opportunity to do this via Zoom, and it's just again a Q&A opportunity with myself. Last one we did was with Christina Clark, and we've got other plans to do that. So we'll continue to keep informed, and as I said, don't hesitate to reach out to me personally at ceo@gvha.ca. So with that, I want to thank everybody and wish you a good Wednesday. And again, take care through these times of COVID, and wash your hands. Thank you.